Hi everybody, welcome back to Indycar, to today's Sunday edition. This week, the Sunday edition of Indycar is coming from Maryhill, one of my favourite places in Glasgow, home of the famous Wee Scribbles artist as well. This morning's show, this afternoon's show, running a wee bit later than I planned. This afternoon's show, the subjects are to do with the fact that Scotland now has two governments instead of one. You may be wondering what the hell I'm talking about, but it seems like the Tories under Mr Mundell at the Scotland office have decided to rename the Scotland office the Scottish Government. Now, this is part of a new plan in which David Mundell will take over the reins, if you like. He'll start a process after Brexit of presiding over the stripping of powers of Holyrood, to the point where eventually the Scotland office, as it now is, will become the Scottish Government. It will tell Holyrood what it can do and what it cannot do. And then eventually, when Holyrood is finally closed, which is the end game for this particular plan, Mr Mundell will have his entire Scottish Government in place, all 3,000 members of it, who will be located at Leith Docks at Victoria, I think it's Victoria Docks actually, in a new building down there, which was originally created ostensibly to house the new customs, the tax office. Now, as I've mentioned in previous posts, this arrangement of something like 2,900 new people to be employed in this building doesn't go anywhere near enough to actually have a new Scottish tax office, because the previous tax office needed over 7,000 personnel to deal with the sheer volume of income tax, personal taxation and business taxes in Scotland. So it doesn't really wash that you'd only need 3,000 people for a tax office. The other thing that I've now discovered, and information has been coming out in little bits and pieces to me from various sources, but it would seem like the whole point of this new Scottish Government, in inverted commas, which Mundell is going to be in charge of, its purpose is to make sure that there is an integrity in the internal market, if you like, of the United Kingdom after Brexit. It is to ensure that Scotland remains firmly attached to the United Kingdom, and to make sure that its economic benefits, its enormous resources, do not end up back in the hands of the Scottish people. For the very simple reason that the British government's entire budget and economy is based on borrowing money. Now, you might know that its AAA rating, which it gets from the various rating agencies about how trustworthy it is to repay loans, has slipped by a couple of points. I can't remember exactly what the rating is now. It's probably just an A rating, but it is a doubtful A rating because of the situation with Brexit. But underpinning the UK's ability to borrow money is its collateral, and the collateral that we have in the UK is primarily the North Sea oil. It's the largest single natural resource which the United Kingdom has at its disposal, and it uses that huge collateral as the basis for borrowing billions and billions of pounds on the market to run the economy for each year. So the taxation that the United Kingdom collects is not really what is used to run the economy. It's money borrowed from international banks at preferential rates. However, since Brexit, those rates have slipped, and we are now paying more interest because we are less able to repay these loans because the economy is so weak. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the plans that the Tories have are to have in place about 3,000 civil servants and David Mundell to lead them for when they dismantle the devolved Parliament in Scotland. And they're also planning a similar type of arrangement in Northern Ireland. The reason why Arlene Foster has not come to any agreement with Sinn Féin about power sharing is that they don't actually want any power sharing. The DUP and the Tories want Ireland to be governed directly from London, and likewise they want Scotland in the same situation. Now there's a distinct lack of any news of this in the media at the moment, for the simple reason that they don't want you to think about this, and they don't really want you to know about it, pardon me, because it's going to bring people out onto the streets around Holyrood to protect the Parliament that was fought so hard to obtain. Now, I've said in the past that Holyrood is really a monument to devolution. And if after the Brexit deal goes through and the repeal bill is enacted, if that results in the stripping of the powers of Holyrood, then it proves something, which is that Holyrood was never intended to be an independent Scotland's place of government. It was just a happy talking shop which had no real powers and which was there simply to satisfy the European Council and their desire for all the nations of the United Kingdom to seem to be at least represented in some way democratically in their own areas. And with the end of the European Union and Britain's involvement in it coming up shortly, all of that will change. And the words that have been coming out of David Mundell's mouth recently confirm the fact that he thinks, and he has said this himself, and you can look up the quotations, David Mundell has said that he thinks that the Scottish Parliament was predicated entirely on being a member of the EU. And after Brexit and we leave the EU, that means there will be changes for Holyrood. Now, these are his own words, changes. He doesn't specify what those changes will be. But we know that the changes are likely to be the stripping of power, the pulling of power back from the devolved Parliament, back to be retained and reserved at Westminster. Now, we're already very close to that. The Scotland Act, after the Smith Commission, after the defeat of the independence at the independence referendum in 2014, there were lots of promises made about almost devolution, virtually devolved, and, you know, Gordon Brown made some sweeping statements about we had almost full, you know, home rule. That was what he was promising. And what we've actually been given is 15% of taxation. Still got 85% of it in London, and all we got was 15%. That's not home rule, as we all know. So there have been a lot of lies told. The other question about David Mundell and his new office down at Victoria Docks is, where is the money coming from to pay for this new pseudo-Scottish government, the one which is going to take over from the real democratically elected Scottish government? Where are they getting the money to pay for that? Because we're not seeing it coming out of David Mundell's expenses. We're not seeing it in any kind of grants being made to the Scotland office. The word I have at the moment, and it's unconfirmed just now, but the word I have at the moment is the money has been scraped together and taken away from the Department for International Development and Foreign Aid. So they were basically robbing the foreign aid budget to put money into this Scottish colonial outpost at Leith Docks, where Mr Mundell is going to become the Viceroy of Scotland, and his minions are going to run the whole of the country from Leith Docks, and Holyrood will just simply be a circus, something to distract people's attention from what the Tories are actually doing. Now, I don't have confirmation of this at the moment, but I do have word from two different sources which tell me that the funding for the 3,000 civil servants is not coming from a source that we already know about. It's not coming from any source that is being published anywhere. There's no transparency, and if you put in a Freedom of Information request about this, you'll probably never hear anything again about it. But the point is, the money is coming from somewhere, and we're not being told where from. But we do know from what Mundell has already said that he is intending to become the new ruler of Scotland when independence is thwarted by simply dragging all the powers of Holyrood back to London. There are events coming up on the 23rd of March where we have asked people to come and show up at Holyrood to surround the building and to demonstrate their solidarity for protecting what we have. It's our Parliament. It's the only place that we have from which to run our country at the moment. We will need it during the next referendum. We will need it during the period just after we vote yes, because we'll need to have a centre for government anyway. And the last thing we want is for Mundell to win or to gain power before we can become independent. It would be very difficult to dislodge the Tories if we allow them to move first. So there's a lot of things going on in the background. It's coming to the point now where it's like a Machiavellian plot, and it literally is as complicated and arcane as that. People are doing things in the background secretly behind our backs. They're not being publicised. The national press and newspapers are not being told about it. None of the journalists are investigating it. None of the BBC or ITN journalists are in the slightest way interested in covering this. But I do know that these broadcasts that I'm making at the moment are being shared amongst MSPs at Holyrood at the moment. Now, if they're being shared and taken seriously by MSPs at Holyrood, then I'm delighted, because for the first time since I started Indycar, we've got some direct actions coming from MSPs, beginning to listen to the alternative media and start to think about what's actually going on right in their neighbourhood, right in amongst all the political bubble of Holyrood, what is going on in the background that they're not seeing. Now, the issue with the flags last week, where Nicola Sturgeon was libelled by 4 different national newspapers, where they lied about the flags being taken down. They lied about her issuing a diktat that it should be that the Union flag should be taken down on the Queen's birthday. All of this lying is now regarded as okay, because George Fawkes last week was quoted as saying that, well, it was the kind of thing that Nicola Sturgeon would do, isn't it? So it's quite all right for them to make these sorts of allegations, because people would believe that that's the kind of thing that Nicola Sturgeon would do. And these were his comments. I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but George Fawkes basically said that lying about the democratically elected leader of another country in order to smear her and libel her for political ends was okay, and it was perfectly legitimate for the British newspapers under the direction of the British state, was okay for them to tell outright, blatant, obvious lies about the leader of the Scottish Parliament. Now, I don't think that it's acceptable at all, and ever since Alistair Carmichael created another lie, if you recall, last year, was it, the year before, but he was lying about the fact that Nicola Sturgeon said something to a French ambassador at a dinner. He made the story up deliberate lie to smear the First Minister to gain political advantage, and yet he got away with it because of some very arcane technical ruling which allows MPs to lie as much as possible whenever they want. Part of the British electoral system is that lying is perfectly okay, as long as you win after you've lied. If you get caught, then they'll provide a loophole for you to escape. It's not okay, and it's about time that the leaders in the SNP, about particularly Nicola Sturgeon, John Swinney, anybody else in the top of the SNP, they need to come out fighting. I must admit, I agree with Craig Murray, who last week tweeted that the government's response to the flag incident was not strong enough, it was not assertive enough. They should have said, as Craig was saying, you can stuff your Union Jack. It's perfectly legal for us to fly our national flag, and we'll do it as long as you like. And if you don't like it, then win an election and gain the right to fly your own flag. Craig Murray is a very, very talented writer and an ex-British ambassador, if I recall correctly. He wrote a book about the skullduggery of the British state in its foreign affairs and the things that it does to help foreign dictators for its own benefit, mostly for selling weapons. However, I'm digressing, but the point is that the SNP really needs to be more aggressive now. The time is now to start defending Holyrood. We're going to need it. The time for being nice and politically correct and polite. We saw during the week Willie Rennie accuse the First Minister of being a liar and being reprimanded in Parliament for saying that. And yet when Nicola Sturgeon replied to him and said that he was just an attention seeker, she was reprimanded for that. Now, I don't believe that Ken McIntosh, is it Ken McIntosh, who's the what do you call him? The presiding officer. That's I keep thinking of the speaker. The presiding officer at Holyrood. Why did he punish Nicola Sturgeon for replying to a very obvious breach of etiquette in the chamber? People are not allowed to accuse one another of lying in the chamber. But that's exactly what Willie Rennie did. He was grandstanding, he was rebuked quite rightly, but McIntosh should have kept his mouth shut after he'd rebuked him. But instead of that, he tried to make it out as if Nicola Sturgeon was at fault for replying to this obvious insult. Again, we see the effect of British bias in the presiding officer, who is very obviously playing for political points by trying to punish the First Minister for responding to a very obvious goad from Willie Rennie, who, let's face it, Willie Rennie is probably the single most lonely politician in Holyrood. His party is tiny, he has no influence, and he has zero policies of any great import and has no success in getting anything done, other than his own politicians lying about Nicola Sturgeon. So I think what I'm saying in this broadcast today is that the whole of the political system in Scotland, the whole of our democracy, is now balanced on a knife edge. We're now in a vulnerable position. We've been stripped of the defences that we had through the European Union. They will be taken away as soon as the repeal bill passes its final stages in Westminster, and when it's enacted, well, that's it. We're completely sitting ducks. The Parliament in Edinburgh can be shut down at any time the Tories can think of a justification to do it. And what is the SNP going to do about that when it happens? Because that is how the British will spike the SNP's guns before we get the next referendum. And it's my opinion, and my opinion only, that the SNP needs to act first before the repeal bill has any effect. It needs to get its retaliation in first, because if we don't, then Scotland will lose control of the situation very quickly. And after that, all bets are off. I don't know how the SNP government could regain control once the British government starts repealing bits of legislation and pulling back those powers and putting Mundell in as its puppet leader in Scotland. It's obvious to just about everybody else outside of the Holyrood bubble that this is what's going to happen. I just don't know why it's not obvious to people inside Holyrood. Let's hear from the MSPs what they think about this. Do they trust Mundell? Do they know what is going on down in Leith? Do they believe the lame explanations for the 3,000 civil servants that suddenly are necessary after Mundell had been getting by with something like 5 up until now? None of it washes. It's all very, very suspicious. And I think even without firm evidence, you can see the way things are going. Anyway, I'll leave it there for today. I look forward to hearing your comments after the show. I'd just like to say thank you to everybody who's viewing today. The viewing figures for the first time ever have reached over 145 today, and I'm absolutely blown away with that. I also know that we're getting hundreds of shares on YouTube as well, and the viewing figures for the last week are over 90,000 on a regular basis. This is the second week we've been above 90,000. So thank you all for viewing, and please keep sharing widely, and remember to share publicly, not just to friends. Alright, I'll see you tomorrow. That's Indycar for today. I look forward to hearing from you later on in the week. Bye for now.